Yeah, so when I studied fashion design, I absolutely loved drawing, but I couldn't sew for the life of me. So after my first few exams were disastrous, I switched to graphic design. But I still have a love for fashion, and I often go and train in big companies, fashion companies. So through academy class as well, I've been to New Look and Marks and Spencer. And so I go in and I help the designers who are there to streamline their work and to pick up on tips and tricks in Illustrator. There's also Photoshop that fashion designers use, but Illustrator really is the primary tool for fashion designers. And the thing is, I can't give you this is the only way to do it, because you walk in and even at, for example, like New Look, there's thousands of designers and everybody has their own style. So, but there's some basic tricks that I want to show you today. We have an hour, so I'm going to run through the main ways fashion designers work. But of course, if you are looking at a career in the fashion industry, where you will bring in your own style and your own preferences, and you will see that when you go into different types of places, you will be taught different ways to do it. So, and they will have different preferred looks of how they want you to do the flats, which is the mock-ups of where exactly the stitching will go, etc. But you can pick that up on the job. How many people here are in the fashion industry? Yeah? And how many people are using Illustrator already? Everyone, pretty much. Because I'm kind of, I'm demoing, basing it on an intermediate knowledge that you already know the basics of Illustrator, the pen tool, filling, color, etc. If you're a complete beginner, you'll still get something out of this, but you probably won't be able to go home and do what I'm showing. But if you have a basic knowledge already, then hopefully you'll be able to, go back and use these tricks that I'm showing you. Okay, and afterwards, feel free to come up to me and ask questions individually. So I'm just going to start with some drawing techniques for taking your sketches, your hand-drawn sketches, into Illustrator, and then we're going to be talking about patterns, filling them, stitching, like all kinds of brush effects to create different zippers and zip lines and trim and little patterns for lace and trims and stuff like that, and different effects for colorizing your artwork. That's the plan. Hope I get it all done in an hour. Okay, so this is the tricky part, talking into a microphone and demoing. Can you all hear me? Okay. Again, give me a shout if I lose concentration and don't realize the mic isn't working, okay? So we're going to start off with Illustrator, and basically it used to be all hand-drawn, right? But then nowadays it's the luxury of being able to spend hours on sketching is kind of gone. And very often a designer will start with a hand-drawn sketch because we're still it's a very creative industry and it's still very much creativity-based, and then scan it in and then trace the artwork in Illustrator in order to turn it into a fashion drawing. So the most common way would probably be using the pen tool. If you're looking at a finished illustration and if you want to know how it was done, if you analyze this document here, you can see when I click on it that the shapes are perfect shapes, perfectly closed. It's a group. So if I go and ungroup that, I have to ungroup it several times. This is just a particular file. You can no longer ungroup when the ungroup button is no longer available. When it's gray, then you're done. So there were loads of groupings. But as you can see here, if you look, this is a perfect trouser leg, and here's another perfect trouser leg. And so this is super easy to fill with color afterwards. And the way this would have been done is that you would have gone and placed a photograph of some kind of a hand sketch. Hang on. Oh, I wasn't patient enough. There it is. And in order to avoid it from moving and jiggling around while you're tracing it with the pen tool, you would work with layers. So you would go and open up your layers palette and double-click on the layer that the artwork is on, turn it into a template layer. A template layer means it's going to be locked in position and dimmed so that it won't move while you are trying to trace over it. And then you would go and use your pen tool and you would trace the shapes using the pen tool. Now you can't do it on the locked layer, so you would need to create a new layer. Usually you'd give it a name so that you don't get confused between them. So the template layer is locked, and then you can call this layer here trace, and then you can start and go across using the pen tool, and there's loads of shortcuts, and I'm not going to go into all that because that's an hour demo by itself, the pen tool, and a lot of you might already use it. But the idea would be that you would think about whether you want this to be separate, each trouser leg to be a separate shape, each pocket to be a separate shape, or whether you want it all to be one big silhouette. So you have to think ahead how you're later on going to colorize this, and when you're tracing, so that you create overlapping shapes that you can then individually take and fill with different patterns, colors, etc., gradients, and so on. So it's a long process, but the idea is that you would get together a template of your favorite, of the most common flat flat designs. So you would probably end up, if you go into a big company, they probably already have the basics ready there for you to go and use. So that's how you would end up with this kind of a drawing. But this is a long process, and it requires a lot of patience and very good skills with the pen tool. There is another way to do it, which is using image trace. Image trace has a different effect. Image trace means that I've got a photograph like this that I've placed already, and I will use, I have to be in my selection tool, I have to select it, and I will have to go, when you bring in your artwork, you will see that up here in the top left menu, the control bar, is a button called Image Trace. You can just click on that and hope for the best, but it's not going to work, because when you do that, it's like, it just does something very random. But what it does is it turns a bitmap image into a vector image. It turns it from a pixelated Photoshop image, which you can't really easily colorize or manipulate, into a vector graphic, which you can easily tweak. Now, what you would have to do is you'd have to not click on the main image trace button, but click on the fly out and choose one of the presets, and then also go into much more depth creating your own presets, because these will not give you the perfect result. The first ones, the first ones, 3-color, 6-color, high fidelity, is for colored images, so that's no use to you. Shades of Gray is going to give you a shaded grayscale image, so it's one of the 5 bottom ones that you want to start off with, very much depending on the style of the drawing you're tracing. So I can't give you a general, this is what the settings you must use. It's a bit of trial and error. So if I start with sketched art or technical drawing, either of those are going to start me off with something that looks like the beginning of what I want to get to, but it's not nowhere near. So after you've hit that button, the generic image trace button, you would then go and look up here in the control bar again, and the control bar has changed now and gives you information. There it lists the presets again. But what you really want is you want to open up the image trace panel. There's a button here for the image trace panel. You click on that, and then you can go into a lot more detail of how you are tracing this. So it depends how light your hand sketch is. The threshold needs to be brought up to see the lines better. So you can pull that threshold up, not too far, because then it'll get too bloated and you might pick up on dirt that was on the paper or whatever. So you need to, again, I can't give you must use a 200 setting, because it depends on the drawing. But then you should also open up the advanced menu up here, down here, and choose how close the paths should fit to the original drawing. So the higher the amount that you choose, the higher the paths, the more closely it'll stick to your original drawing. One annoying thing in Illustrator is that once you hit the image trace button, you can no longer see your original drawing. It's just one of those things. So you can, though, up here, you see where it says tracing results, ask to see the source image and switch back and forth between tracing result and source image, the original photo and what you're getting. And if you want a shortcut, you can hold down the Alt key and toggle. While your hand is on the Alt key, you can switch between the preview and what you are about to, the original image and what you are about to get. So you would need to play around with the path figure to get it as close as possible to the original and keep an eye on it. And you can also play around with the noise level. So if it's picking up too much dirt, like maybe your pen was like a bit leaking, or the paper wasn't perfectly clean, so then as you're pulling that up, you're removing noise, but then it'll start thinking that the button is noise, because if you're increasing the amount of radius pixels that it should ignore, then eventually it'll ignore details like stitching and pockets. So it takes a while to play around with this. You also need to decide whether you want filled areas or strokes. Strokes are just outlines, and fills are closed filled shapes. Mostly you will work with strokes, and I will show you how to fix the fact that you have no shapes to work with in 1 minute. So the idea is you play around with this and you spend quite a bit of time getting it right. And it will give you a very bloated looking line, but that's just because it uses a very fixed stroke by default. But when you then say that when you're done, you need to say, okay, I'm ready, I'm done now. And what you need to do is you need to hit the expand button up, because you can't manipulate this now. It's still in a preview locked mode. But the moment you hit expand, it has turned it into editable artwork, vector artwork. You can then ungroup because it might have given you some groupings. So the two shirts, I only want the top jacket. And you can see here that it has created this outline with, for some reason, a 2-point stroke, which is why it looks so fat. So if I go and highlight that and make it a 0.5 point stroke, or then it looks a lot better already. One more word, I'm just going to go back and Control Z and undo this, just to go back to before I hit expand. One more tip. So you go through this process, but you probably have the same drawing style all the time. So let's say you spend 20 minutes getting it just right, the tracing settings, the threshold, the path fitting, etc., etc., etc. And then next time you want that to be there for you. You don't want to have to go through all of that again. You create a preset in the image trace. So you click on the little fly out here and you say save as new preset. And then it'll be there for you the next time you go in here as your name or the company that you're working for, or your whatever, the artist that whose sketches you're tracing could be up here. So I've got a whole bunch of those on my computer at home that I just have to go to depending on who I'm working for or with. So yeah. So then I hit expand, and then that becomes editable. Now I didn't spend enough time on this one, so it isn't as good as I would like it to be. So I'm just going to use the one that's already here that I've created earlier. So that's the same exact technique, the image trace technique, and I've made them into thin strokes. So the stroke is 0.2, whatever, so quite thin. Now I want to start colorizing this. We talked about just now how easy it is to colorize these trousers, for example, here, because they were traced with the pen tool. So it'll take you just a few seconds to fill with patterns, fill with colors, and etc. But this document that I've just created with image trace has a problem. And the problem is that image trace is not as good as the pen tool. It's not as technical. It's more loose and artist-friendly. So what you're getting is open lines, a lot of open lines like these. So what on earth is that how am I going to colorize this if I've got all these open path lines? If I try to colorize this now, I think you probably know where I'm going with this, but if I highlight all of this and colorize it, there's no closed paths, so it's actually quite cool, the result. But that's not what I want. I want it to be filled. So do you see the problem? But there is a tool that lets you could now go and painfully use the object path join command, where you highlight the open endpoints one by one, and then you join each one. But again, you're going to be sitting there for hours doing that, turning open lines into closed paths. However, there is a tool called the Live Paint tool. The Live Paint tool is on the toolbar, and it is sitting below the shape builder. It's called the Live Paint bucket. Let's be specific. And what you can do is the Live Paint bucket, when you have a selection, will recognize areas that look like they should be closed and close them, fill them and close them for you. Before I do this, I'm going to select my artwork and make a copy of it, Alt drag, because I actually want to not fill all of these little areas here. I want to only fill the main areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my selection tool to get rid of these panels and stitches and even the buttons. I just want to flat colorize the main thing. And then I can use my old artwork, the one that I've got above, the copy, to put the stitches and all that stuff, all the details back in, just as an overlay, so to speak. So I'm just deleting that, just the main bits, okay, so that I've got just the outline. Whether I want to keep the pockets or not, that's a decision, but I just leave them for now. So with that, I'm going to use my selection tool and select the whole thing. Then I switch, with the selection intact, I switch to the Live Paint bucket. And as soon as you hover over it, I don't know if you can see, it becomes, the screen is huge, you can't see. It becomes red. So to say it's ready to make a live paint group. And do you see that the little color it's showing me? It is actually traveling through my swatch palette, and it's starting off with the none color. If I want to start off with, let's say, brown, I can already click on a brown color, and then it's showing me that color in my preview of the live paint. So if I now click anywhere, it recognizes closed areas that appear closed, even though we all know that they're actually open lines. and I can click, 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 and colorize. As I'm hovering, it highlights them in red, and then I can click to colorize. If I want a different color, I can click on this, excuse me, dust. If I want another color, I can click on the swatch in the swatches panel, but there's a much easier way. Because if you look at the tool, the Live Paint tool, it shows me one color to the right and one color to the left. Because if you use your arrow keys, you can travel through, and if you look at the swatches palette, you can see how it's traveling through, up, down, left, right, through my color palette, so that I can go and very quickly and easily change my mind about colors just by using my arrows instead of having to go and click on the actual color in the toolbar. Yeah? Like so, and like so, and like so, and like so. And that's kind of the easy, quick way of colorizing a drawing that has been traced by Live Trace, which means your style can be as loose as anything, and it will still work afterwards. Then, when you're ready with this, when you're done, forgive the color scheme and whatever. I don't have enough time to actually spend on designing in this course, because we just have so little time. But I can then go and select the other artwork, bring it on top. I can use my Align palette or just my Smart Guides to make sure that it's right on top, and make sure it's in the front, bring to front. And that way I have the details now that the stitches, etc. On top of that. And so I have now got my finished, sort of colorized flat. I still need to deal with the buttons, whether I want to apply a design to them or just choose a different color for them, whatever. And I can work in details. And there you have it. So that's how you use Live Trace. It used to be called Live Trace. They've changed the name of it. It's called Image Trace. So you've got a graphic. You select Image Trace, which is only available after you've placed the graphic and selected it. So just remember that, because sometimes you'll be like, where is that option? That option is only there when you actually have a photograph on the screen. It's taking a bit of time to load. There you go. And then you can use the Image Trace button. Start off with something like, as I said, you have to experiment with either sketched art or technical drawing, but then afterwards you will need to go into the presets, play around with the settings until it looks the way you want it to look. And in the end, obviously this is not going to go anywhere because it's too tiny. And then in the end, save that as a preset so that you can use it in the future if that's the kind of drawing style that you're always going to be copying. And then the last step is to hit the expand button so that you can colorize it. Then you need to make it into a Live Paint group with the Live Paint bucket and hover and travel through colors with your arrows to colorize the artwork. Get rid of the details first so that you can then put them, just like the lines and the panels and the stitching, etc., so that you can then put them on top on a separate layer afterwards. So that is the intro to the Live Paint bucket. Next, I want to actually fill this with a pattern. I have a checker pattern that I would like to use. I'm going to give a whole talk on patterns later this afternoon if anyone is interested. So I don't want to now spend a huge amount of time on creating patterns. Otherwise, those of you who are coming back will be extremely bored. So I'm going to just show you quickly. There's a super cool trick. Most people think that the only type of pattern you can work with are vector patterns. I just quickly filled the whole thing. But meaning patterns that were actually created in Adobe Illustrator. But that is not the case. You can actually place a photograph nowadays in the newer versions of Illustrator. So I'm going to go File, Place, and I already have placed, there's loads of image libraries you can find online for fashion designers. So I've already found a checker pattern. Hang on, got to find it. Checker textile pattern, a JPEG file, and I'm going to place that file in the document so that I can then go and turn that into a pattern and fill the sleeves with that. Now, here it is, and if I click, it'll just place it at its original size, which is huge. So you might want to click drag, which will define the area, but I didn't do that, so I'm going to just scale it down to roughly the size that I want to use it at later. I can scale it later inside the shape, but it makes more sense to already get it to a decent size beforehand. And then I can select it, and just like a vector, I can drag it and bring it into the swatches palette, even though it's a JPEG photograph. Except it's not going to work. If I had sound turned on this machine, it'll now go bing, because it's rejecting it. The reason it's rejecting it is because of something called a way of placing the file. when you place a photograph, and normally by default, you will see that the link button is turned on in your placing options here, a little box that's called link. And that means that it's not actually placing the photograph permanently embedded into the Illustrator file. It is keeping it in this folder on the desktop so that it keeps the file size small. So if you have a large Photoshop file, it's not adding the file size to your Illustrator file because it's always looking in that folder for it. And linking is a great way of managing files and keeping file size small. But in this case, we don't want to link. So I already brought this picture in, but it is linked. And I can tell up here in the control bar, because it says it's a linked file, and it tells me the file name and where it lives. But I can embed it at this stage. I can just hit the embed button. So when the picture is selected, hit embed, and then it just asks me if I'm sure. Yes, I'm sure. And now I can, it's the same picture file, but now I can drag it into my swatches palette, and I can go and fill my drawing with it. Pardon? The embed function is that after, when you have the image, let me just go back so the picture is embedded, is brought in, yeah? And when you click on the image, up in the control bar, that bar right underneath the menu, it tells you that it's a linked image. Well, now it doesn't because I've already unembedded it. Hang on, I'm just going back. It tells you linked file and a file name, and then here it says embed, yeah? And then once it's embedded, it no longer looks for the original file in that folder, so you've lost that connection, but you now can make it into a pattern. So I drag it in, and now it is a pattern. And now I can fill my artwork, except that I, of course, don't want to fill the whole thing. I want to colorize individual bits of this. And I can use my live paint bucket, but there is a problem. So I can go back to my live paint bucket, because do you see that there's a group around it, but it looks different to this group here. This is the normal bounding box. This is the live paint, and it has these little filled in squares to tell you it's a live paint group. So that's just for you to realize that it's a live paint group. So as I can click back on my live paint bucket and go and find the pattern, which is at the bottom of my swatches now, and then I can go and click and click and click and click. Here's the problem. I want to rotate parts of this. For example, on the sleeve, I want it to be a 20-degree angle on the left and a minus 20-degree angle, like, you know, on the other side, so that it kind of looks like the way I want the pattern to flow. Or maybe I want to scale the pattern inside the shape. And as long as it's a live paint bucket tool, I can only rotate the whole shape as one, but I can't rotate the individual sleeve, and definitely I can't rotate just the pattern inside the sleeve. So after you've done your basic filling, there comes a point when you need to, again, expand. Expand is Illustrator's key word when it wants you to take something that has been created automatically or through some kind of a function in Illustrator and make it accessible and editable. So we expand after image trace, and we expand an image that has been turned into a live paint group. So with the image selected, I go under the object menu, and I can say, there it is, there's the expand function here, and you can also find it under live paint expand. It's the same command again and again. You'll see it in several places in Illustrator. So there's a separate live paint menu that belongs to the live paint tool, and then you hit expand, and now it doesn't look any different, although the live paint group symbol is gone, so you can no longer use your live paint bucket now. So I always recommend, if you're not sure to do any of these things, keep copies of the originals before you do expand, or in any way, so you're not stuck. Okay, so now I want to scale just the sleeve, and it's a grouped object, but I can always use the group selection tool so that I don't have to go object ungroup. I just click on the little white arrow, not the direct selection tool, the group selection tool, the one with the plus, which is hiding underneath the direct selection tool. I click on that sleeve, so I can actually now see that I can move that sleeve around. Now, I can go and rotate, for example, with the rotate tool, but that rotates the whole sleeve and the pattern inside. I want to keep the sleeve as it is and just rotate the pattern. The best way to do it is using the transform palette under Window, Transform. Transform is another place for you where you can go and type in an angle. So it's the same as using the rotate tool, but it's just on the menu here, that little icon, you can rotate by typing in a degree, but an angle, but that's the same problem. It's still rotating the whole sleeve, not just the pattern. But there is something really interesting hiding away in the menu.
you can tell it to only rotate one aspect of the shape. When you have a shape, you have the object, the actual object, and then you have the fill. And you see in here, it says transform object only or transform pattern only. So if I click on the transform palettes flyout and I check transform pattern only on, there's a little exclamation mark that is warning you that you have limited the transformation. But that now means that if I type in 20 degrees, I have to type it in because it's not one of the presets. Oh, hang on. There. It has rotated the sleeve at that angle. And if you're not happy with that, then you can just go and play around with different angles until you've got the right one. I'm not going to waste time now getting it perfect. But that's the idea of rotating it. And then you would do the same thing with the other sleeve. You click with the group selection tool, okay? And it's still, whatever you've chosen, that box that I've checked on saying transform pattern only is still on. So you don't have to do that again. You have to undo it if you later on want to rotate both the shape and the pattern together. But then you can go in here and type in a minus angle. I can't remember what angle I've now chosen because I've played around with this so much. So, but anyway, so you should choose the opposite of whatever you've chosen on the other side. The same thing goes for scaling, by the way. You can then click, maybe this pattern on the inside should be really large. So if I go and use the scale tool, it would scale the shape and the pattern in it, right? But if I have transform pattern only on, then I can use the width and height in here and just type in a different width. I can also type in percentage points. So it's saying millimeters, but I can say make it 200 and then the percentage point, and turn the little link button on so that it's doing it on the width and the height. And I've now scaled up, I don't know if you can see the transformation that just happened, scale it up to double its size. And if I want the opposite, maybe on the inside 2 panels, I can, with my shift key held down, group select those 2 sides, and then go and maybe make it smaller by typing in 80 and then the percent symbol into the width, and that's reducing it to 80%. So that's rotating patterns inside your fashion illustration, and the key is window, transform, and then make sure that in your flyout, the little options that come out on the top right-hand corner turn on transform pattern only. And don't forget to turn that off again if you then later on want to do other stuff, because otherwise it's going to remember that. That's why the exclamation mark is there to warn you. So, yeah. Okay, sorry, I just need to compose my thoughts and see where I'm going with this. It's unfortunately quite flat in Illustrator. There's always going to have, that's the problem with Illustrator, that it always has that, especially patterns. You know, gradients, you can create gradient mesh to make it look more like a, but this, there are options, but it's a little bit too long to go into it, but there is something called envelope distort, where you can make, put a mesh point on top of your shape and manipulate, but the pattern won't be editable because the pattern is stuck inside the shape at the moment. So you can mesh the shape but not the pattern. You would have to expand the pattern, meaning it'll release itself from the shape that, like, from being a pattern and become a normal shape, and then you can use envelope distort to pull on corner points. Yeah, but it's no longer a pattern then, it would then be like artwork. Okay? Or go into Photoshop for that kind of effect at the end, you know, so because that's a little bit of a more flexible environment, although then you lose the vector ability, so it's a kind of, you know, catch-22. So, but for flats in fashion, you want that look anyway. You want that very flat look. Which leads me to other way of fashion drawings, because this is drawing flats, which would then go with, you would send that off with the example swatch and with loads of instructions, and then with loads of, like, you know, an original pattern, like maybe a handmade pattern of it, so with dimensions, etc., for the factory to produce. Okay. So the flats need to be quite precise in their aspect ratio and things like that. But then often fashion designers will use fashion for fashion illustration or for taking a sketch and quickly colorizing it, like, more in an artistic way rather than in this perfect symmetrical way. And that, for loose drawings, is my next demo, I think. Is it? Hang on, let me just find the file. Oh, okay, I'm jumping to the next, to demo 4, never mind. This is a hand-drawn sketch that has already been converted using image trace. I just wanted to save time Otherwise, it's like, it would be taking forever to get this result. But you can see that it was hand-drawn because of that look and feel it's got. And so I placed the photograph, and then I used image trace, and I used sketched art, and I played around with it until I got this result, which once again, it's a grouped object, and once again, it's got loads of open paths in it. Live Paint would not do very well with this, because what I just showed you earlier is trying to find closed areas. And when you've got a style like this, where there's lots of openings because it was very loosely drawn, it won't be able to find. It might find some areas, but not others, and it might accidentally merge things you didn't want to merge. So we're talking here about a different style. We're talking here about a more creative, flowy style. If I just want to make it look like a marker rendering, as if I'd hand-painted a bit of color, like a hint here and a hint there, a bit of a gradient, I would then go a completely different way. First of all, I'm going to lock the layer that she's on, so that my color is on a separate layer. I'm going to create a new layer and call it color, or colorize, or whatever you want to call it. Okay? And the tool I would use this time is not the Live Paint bucket, but the Blob Tool. It's called the Blob brush. Hang on, I have to find it. There. Underneath the paintbrush, so there's a normal paintbrush, which is also okay, but the normal paintbrush gives you strokes, So that's not a filled shape, that is a stroke. The Blob paintbrush creates shapes. Even though it's a brush, when you're drawing, after you let go, it looks the same as my normal brush at first. But when I click on it afterwards, you can see that there's a fill color, which I can change to a gradient or whatever, and it's an actual Bezier shape, not a stroke. Okay? So it doesn't have an outline, it is just a shape that I can then manipulate. And there's other things that are really nice about the Blob tool. The Blob Paint tool lets you, if you are drawing with painting with the same color and you're painting on top of stuff, it merges overlapping areas. Only if the blob brush is set to the same color. The moment you switch color, and it's the stroke color, by the way, confusingly, it's the stroke color you set at first. If I draw over it with a different color, it doesn't merge with what's below. But if I go and add more of the same color, then it connects adjacent pixels and it turns it into one big blobby shape. Hence the Blob tool. That's why it's called that. And so what I can do is I can choose a color, for example, for the hat, and then choose, I'm doing it on top, but I'm going to then move the layer down. So I choose the stroke color to be that maroon red. I can change the brush size the same way I can change brush sizes in Photoshop, by using the brackets on my toolbar next to the letter P, the square brackets. Right bracket to make it bigger, left bracket to make it smaller. And then I can go to my hat and kind of do something like that. And I'm doing this on purpose I don't want it to be perfect. So that's why I'm doing it a little bit like this. And then maybe the top over here, like so. Okay? And I'm going to send that layer down one level just by dragging it down in my layer panel so that you can see the look. I've locked the top layer, so I'm in no danger of going into it. If I now want to make the back a bit darker, then I would choose a darker color on the swatches panel, make my brush size a bit smaller, and go about it like so. Okay? And you can have lots of fun with that and just, make it look good. And if you accidentally go into the face or whatever, you can manipulate that because it is a Bezier shape, or you can just delete and start again, which might be quicker. And then you can send things to the back, bring things to the front. And if you want a gradient, then you can paint with a gradient. Make sure the gradient is in the stroke, because the blob brush goes by stroke. That's one thing that people get confused with. Even though it's creating a filled shape, originally it's using the stroke. And then you can go and do something like that. And then keep changing your brush size, and that's creating that very loose, ooh, that doesn't look great. I think you get the idea, right? That very loose look. Brush was too big, and I'm using a mouse instead of a digital pen, which is also making this extremely difficult. But there you go. That's kind of the idea of the blob brush. I'll just do the skirt very quickly. And of course, because it's a gradient, if it's a gradient in this case, you can then afterwards use the gradient tool the same way you can on any other shape, in order to then go and change where it positions itself if you're not happy with that positioning. So all of the normal drawing tools are at your disposal. Yeah. So that's more the creative, loose way of colorizing fashion drawings, almost as if you had done marker rendering rather than the computerized look that you get. So a completely different approach to the first demo, which is for flats. Any questions so far? Okay. Let me just.
I always wondered what the blob brush is
Yeah. It's mainly for that painterly look that you used to only be able to get in Photoshop. So you have to take your vector graphic into Photoshop just for that colorized look, and now you can do it. Me personally, yeah. I kind of switch between mouse and tablet, but some people swear by only using the tablet. But yeah, it depends very much on how artistic and I want to be. Hang on, I'm just thinking where I'm going next. So we've done this. Okay, I'm going back to patterns for a minute. How are we doing with time? Okay, we're good. Hi. Good timing, because I'm just starting a whole new topic, like a different topic. So, we already talked about patterns and filling the object with a pattern. Briefly in the jacket, the demo here, that filling the jacket with a basic plait or checker pattern. But I want to mention, and again I'm going to give a talk on patterns later, so that might be a repeat. Let's say you want to fill these trousers with a blue color for jeans, and then have a pattern texture on top of that. There is a way of overlapping lots of different patterns and lots of different styles on top of each other, using something called, I didn't need to select the whole thing, I should just have selected the actual trousers with my group selection tool, the actual shape. So if I want a dark color for the jeans, that's not good. Hang on. Sorry, I just have to find the right selection. Or maybe it's just the way that I drew it. Okay. Sorry, guys. If I wanted to colorize something and have more than one effect on it, that's when I would use the appearance panel. So I filled my shape. I give up. Forget the fact that there's trimming missing. I'm gonna fix it. If I now fix it, it's something going to take time out of our demo. So obviously there's stitching and a belt, but for now let's just say I want to have a jeans pattern on top of that. First of all, there is loads of pre-designed patterns, vector patterns this time I'm going to talk about, already in the swatches palette hiding away, so you don't even need to know anything about creating patterns to get them. You click on the little fly out and you say open Swatch Library, and then you can open up the patterns and load. The basic graphics are brilliant because they're dots and lines and textures that are very much for fashion design purposes. And you can purchase and download libraries full of these and bring them into Illustrator as well. You might never need to create your own pattern in your whole life. But basically, after you have after you have loaded it, you can then go and fill the shape with that pattern. But as you see, this is lovely, but it covers up my original blue jeans color. That's because by default you can only have one fill color at a time for your object, right? Now if you go under the window menu and open up the appearance panel, you can overlap different fill effects on the same shape. I see what the problem is. Okay. So now that I've got my shape selected, it tells you the existing stroke on the shape and the existing fill. So if you're changing the fill in here, it reflects on that area and shows you the new fill. Okay? You can also click on that little swatch in the appearance panel, and then you get the fly out, which is another shortcut to the swatches panel, so you can change your mind in here. So if I want a pattern on top of a blue fill, then I can go and choose my basic blue fill. Then I want to create a second fill. I click on the fly out options arrow of the appearance panel, and I say add new fill. And what it does is it duplicates the fill. So in my fill, in my appearance panel, you now have two blue fills. But I can go on here and choose a different fill for that particular. Hang on, something. What's going on? Okay. Let's just go for a second and choose a lighter color. Oh, it's not selected. Well, it really helps to have your artwork selected. That's kind of using Illustrator 101. Oops. I hope they edit that out of the video. Okay, so then you can overlap the pattern. And if the pattern is a completely opaque pattern, then it's not going to work because it's just going to cover. But if the pattern was drawn with transparent background, then you can see here that it has, overlapped it. So I've got my, two patterns on top of each other. And I can also play around with the blending modes, which is under the window menu. Open up the transparency panel, which gives you the option of reducing the opacity, for example, of that pattern, so that it becomes see-through against what's behind it, or using blending modes, which is a way of combining the colors. I usually tend to use multiply for this, which makes sure that the colors, the blue, 100% of the blue mixes with 100% of the black, or whatever the color is that you are using in your pattern, and so you get a really good crisp result. And the nice thing is that you can literally have multiple patterns on top of each other, so you can have one stitching going horizontal and another one going vertical, because once you're in that, you can also then go and rotate or change, so you make sure that that fill is selected, and when that fill is selected, you can go and rotate just that fill and not the other fill. So whichever one is highlighted is the one you're working on. So I could technically have the same pattern overlapping twice, but at different angles. So that could be an interesting result with the setup to multiply. Hang on, for some reason it's not letting me do it. How's my time? Am I running out of time? No. Okay, still a bit of time. So yeah, you can overlap different results like that. And if you want a sparkle effect, I've got here a dotted pattern. If you want to make a dotted pattern that looks sparkly, you can go and take that dotted pattern and add little gradients, or to make it look like fake sparkles. I've done that here already, although it's so small that it's hard to see. If I zoom in on it, you can see the sparkle effect, sort of little glimmer, but I can make it stronger. And I can also add all kinds of layer effects to it. So I can go under the effects menu and add something like a outer glow or something like that to make the sparkle glow more. I didn't select it properly, so the fill wasn't selected. Let me just quickly explain what I mean by the pattern. Yeah, I still have it set to multiply. Thanks. That's why. Oh, thank you. Oh, that's what it is. Thank you. I was thinking, why does my demo file not look the way I want it to look? And I was about to do it again to show you how to do it from scratch. So this one here is one of the basics that I found in the swatches panel. Thanks. Open Swatch Library, other library, and patterns, basic graphics, and it was under basic graphic dots. So that's the pattern that I chose. And then I took it out of the panel. So if you like a pattern, you can drag it out into your document and manipulate it further. So I dragged that pattern out, and I then went and colorized. So if you want to see, this is what the patch looks like that then became the pattern. So I just chose the black, I just selected all the little black dots, and I added a tiny, tiny little black and white gradient, going from circular gradient, going from black to white in the middle, and that was how I created the fake sparkle effect. And it looks quite effective on a dark background. Then to make that into a pattern again, I simply selected it after doing all my colorization and dragged it back into the swatches panel, and that's how you create a pattern. And then I applied it, well, for better or worse, I applied it to the shape, and the problem was before in the demo that I had multiply set on, because multiply darkens. It brings the darkness and mixes both colors, the top and the bottom, together, and that's not what I wanted, but I did it for the first demo, which is why it didn't work. So I had to go and set it back to normal in order to show you that. And then of course, when you make that bigger or smaller, then the sparkle can be bigger, can have a bigger sparkle effect, so you get sparkly jeans. Questions? Okay, I don't know how much time you need to get to the next screen, so let me just quickly look and see. Oh, brushes. Oh gosh, I still have so much to talk about. All right, brushes, very quickly. Moving on to the shift dress here. Okay, so let's say you want to create trims and all kinds of lace trimmings or zippers or like all kinds of different effects. Now, you don't want to ever have to take an object and copy paste to make it look again and again and repeat it to make it look like a zip. That would take forever. So luckily, we have the brushes palette. The brushes palette under the window menu, brushes gives you very little when you first open it. So it's kind of, most people who have never played with this go, whatever, it's cute, but it's not exactly essential to working in this program. But fashion designers, this is the is-all and end-all of working in fashion design using brushes. And I'll show you in a minute how to bring in ready-made libraries so you never need to create your own brush. But for this demo, very quickly, I'm going to create a zipper that's going to run along this dress. The dress is already traced, and I've got it on 2 separate layers. This is the original artwork behind, and then the traced artwork on top. And I've made a layer where I'm going to put my brushes on top of that. So to create a brush, there's different types of brushes. I'm not going to talk about all of them. There's ones that make it look like calligraphy, and there's some that create an artistic effect. But I want there's 2 brushes that fashion designers use: scatter brushes and pattern brushes. And I'm going to show you both very quickly. So for this, I'm going to use a scatter brush. This is my zip. Okay, it makes sense to already make it similar size to what you want it to be in the end, although you can scale it, so you don't need to worry about that. And in terms of color, you don't need to worry because you can recolor it through the palette, through the brush panel. I select the artwork that I want. Basically what I want is I want it to be repeated along my path. So I select the artwork and I drag it into the brush palette. The same way you create patterns by dragging them into swatches, you create brushes by dragging them into the brush palette. And then you get a choice of what type of brush you want to create. Some are grayed out because they're just not possible with this artwork, but there's scatter and pattern. I'll explain the difference. Let me do scatter first and click OK.
5 minutes?
Okay. Are we not doing 15 minutes? Like, have we not moved the schedule?
Yeah, okay. 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. Are you guys okay for 10 minutes? Yeah? Okay. Okay. I'll hurry up. My flip-flop might not make it today. There's a flip-flop shoe waiting for you. I don't know if it'll feature today. All right, scatter brush, click OK, and it gives you a preview, but there's no way of seeing what this is going to look like at the moment because there's no way of previewing it on artwork yet. So I'm just going to commit to that and click OK. I should probably name it, but I'm just going to be lazy here. There it is, in the brushes palette, you see. And just to show you what that looks like, if I draw a straight line with the pen tool or with any other brush or whatever, and then I go and apply that brush to it, so I select the path that I've drawn and then I click on that, this is what you get. So what you get is that it takes the same artwork and it repeats it at its original size again and again and again and again and again along the path, okay? Now I'm not happy with that. I'm not happy with the distance. I want it tighter. So this is where I would then have the artwork selected so I can see a preview and double click on the scatter brush so that I can see what I can change in here. And you can change everything from the size, make the size smaller. Make sure you have preview on. And you can change the spacing to bring it closer together, and there you have it. You can create, even with this one simple design, you can create hundreds of different styles just there, okay? And it asks you whether you want the rotation to be relative to the page or to the path. Let me just quickly explain. If you have a curvy path, you want it to always align to the path, not to the page. And that's because, here's my paintbrush, curvy path. This is what it looks like by default. It is aligning it to the page, so it's keeping it horizontal, which doesn't look very good. Whereas if I go and click Align to Path, it will undulate with the path that I've drawn. Okay? Sorry, it depends. If you want a straight zip that goes down, then you keep it on path, on page. If you have, let me just show you, because that keeps it horizontal in a straight line. If you want it to undulate and move with your drawing, then you change it to page, but that rotates my artwork. So I might create 2 of exactly the same brush, like duplicate the brush, have one that undulates and one that doesn't undulate, but you need to know about the difference between the 2. Okay? So that's not what I want. I want the straight one in this case. So if I then go and bring that into the zip very quickly, the good news is about colorizing it and about making it fit is that it'll be a little bit too large now because the design that I've created is too large. I could double click on the scatter brush and change the size in here, but I actually have another way of doing it, and that is, it is a stroke, funnily enough. It's called a brush. This is the brushes palette. So it's applied to the stroke, not to the fill. Okay, it's a stroke that has been attached to this path, and the stroke has a weight to it. So all I need to do, if I want it to be bigger, is increase the stroke weight, and if I want it to be smaller, is decrease it. So you see why I said make it the right size, or roughly the right size to begin with, because that'll save loads of time. But you can then go down and bring it down to a quarter of a size or even more to make it look like this. What about colorization? Right now, if I click on a color, are you guys here for the next talk? I'm going to need another 5 minutes. You can sit, but yeah. If you want to colorize this, okay, you can't, well, at the moment, if I choose a different color in my stroke panel, it doesn't let me. So if I choose blue, it's not colorizing it because the original was designed in black. Double click on the scatter brush again to get back into its properties and change the colorization method here from none to U-shift. And when your preview is turned on, you see that it's shifting the hue, it's changing the color from the original to, this is still the talk from the 9:30, just so you know. You can sit, but yeah, you haven't missed anything. Okay, yeah, so this is, that's how you create the, a brush and colorize it with a scatter brush. Now, what about a pattern brush? If I take the same exact artwork into the pattern brush, just to show you what that does, guys, it's still the previous talk, okay, but it's okay, you can sit. Click on pattern brush, click OK, just quickly to show you the difference. It runs along the seam in a different direction. So that is better for laces and trims and stuff like that. Let me very quickly show you. You can bring in a picture, this is the last bit that I'm showing. You can bring in a picture of a piece of lace that you found online, and you don't even need to make it into artwork. You don't even need to convert it into a vector. So I've got my little lace trim here, and I click the place button. It takes a bit of time for some reason on this machine to bring in. Oh, there it is. Okay, and if I now bring this in, I can drag it into my brushes palette and turn it into a pattern brush, because I want it to run along seamlessly, not repeat. If I made it into a scatter brush, it would stack itself, but that's not what I want. I want a nice little lace trim along the edges. So I click OK. Oh, it isn't embedded. Remember the whole thing about embedding, which we did earlier for patterns? It was still linked. You can't do it until you hit the embed button on the image. So File, Place, and Embed. Now I drag it in, and I click on Pattern Brush, and I click OK, and it creates a pattern that will then run along. So if I now go and draw something with the brush, you can see that it's taking that drawing, that art, and making a lace pattern. So all I have to do is put it in the place where I want it. There is a little bit of a problem that this artwork had a white background around it, so it's covering up my illustration. It isn't vector. The other problem of this, because it's pixel-based artwork, is that I can't colorize it. There's no colorization option. So the last step would probably be, in this case, to use image trace to make this into a piece of art that you can trace. So very quickly, if I go and use the original and quickly use image trace on that, I'm just going to use the sketched art option. I'm not going to spend any time on making this look better because I know you have to go. So I'm just going to use that and delete the white background, because sometimes the white background will come in. I was told that I have another minute. So, okay. Because I started 10 minutes late. Yeah? Okay. So this is now a piece of vector which you can drag in, turn into a pattern brush, and voila. You have a perfect vector pattern that took 2 seconds to make, and you can also colorize it with the U shift on. Okay? So that is creating pattern brushes and scatter brushes using Illustrator. And the last thing I want to tell you is that you can download loads of freebies from the internet, and there's also paid accounts. And if I show you one of them just very quickly so you understand that you don't need to be an amazing artist to do this, here is a rope brush file that I found for free online. Okay? Sorry, it's taking time to open. Okay. Pressure. There. It is already there with brushes saved, and all you need to do is copy that across into your document to use the brushes. Or you can import that document into your brushes library by going into your existing brush library, open brush library, other library, and finding the file that you've downloaded. And then you've got basically thousands of free patterns and brushes at your disposal to work with. That's all we have time for. Thank you.